There's this big wall of like water, this tsunami coming. I can stand there at the beach and kind of hold my hands up and try to stop it, which is going to be futile, or I can try to ride the wave.
My guest today is a Senior Director of Procurement at Root Insurance, where he's also taken on leading AI integrations across finance. He's implemented workflow automation platforms multiple times over, built custom AI agents, and even ran his own consulting practice focused on procurement automation using LLMs and multi-agent systems. So please, welcome Sören Petsch.
100% of people are talking about it. 4% of the companies are actually doing something about it. It's not about jobs. It's about tasks. It's instead of somebody now doing this multiple times a day for looking at the various PDF files and what was entered, right? We built an AI agent to do that. And that's tedious and nobody wants to do that. And so it's faster that way. So there's human in the loop, there's human on the loop, and there's full autonomy, right? Ultimately, a human will be responsible. So now I'm looking for people that are actually more decision makers, that are comfortable with kind of drawing AI and interpreting outputs and so forth, right? There should be fractional CPOs, or chief procurement officers, that support with very high degree of automation, we may be comfortable with for smaller companies. Start doing something. Try something new with AI every day. Don't wait for somebody to tell you how to use AI. Ask that question yourself.
Nobody's behind. We're all in the same kind of getting to the start point of the race. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the AI Floor. My guest today is a Senior Director of Procurement at Root Insurance, where he's also taken on leading AI integrations across finance. He spent 15 years in procurement across software, retail banking, and insurance. He's implemented workflow automation platforms multiple times over, built custom AI agents, and even ran his own consulting practice focused on procurement automation using LLMs and multi-agent systems. So please, welcome Sören Petsch.
Nice to meet you. Great to be here, Shamil.
Thank you so much for joining me on this show. And can we start with you telling us a little bit about who Sören is and what makes you, so enthusiastic and experienced with the current way the technology is evolving?
Well, I think the starting point for me is that I grew up in a country that doesn't exist anymore. So I grew up in East Germany. And so the only reason why I bring that up is I'm familiar, or I've experienced it before, where countries just disappears, where the status quo disappears. And it feels like we're in a moment with AI where a lot of the things that we behold to be true are changing, or where the ground is shifting. The way we will be working with AI in the future will be very different the way we have worked in the past. And so I take that sort of skill set of not seeing the world as it is today as a given, and I'm kind of projecting towards the future in terms of what does the technology sort of enable me to do today, and what does it look like potentially in the future, right? I don't think anybody knows. Whoever claims they do, they certainly are, I think, probably kidding themselves at a minimum. And so I'm trying to be at the forefront, because it feels like there's this big wall of like water, this tsunami coming. And, I can stand there at the beach and kind of hold my hands up and try to stop it, which is going to be futile, or I can try to ride the wave. And so I'm trying to ride the wave. And the best I know to do that is by continuously challenging myself to learn more about the technology and try to figure out how does it actually work and how can I actually use it in a useful way. And some part of those efforts are wasted, and we'll probably talk about that. And some of them yield some real results where I'm just like, this is an indication of what will work and what can work.
I really like that, because partly the reason for this season of the AI Flow podcast is a lot of people reading all of the LinkedIn posts, which are heavily influenced by marketing spends on OpenAI, all of the leading AI companies. They kind of tend to force you into that, seeing a huge tsunami that is crashing on of you. Mm-hmm. And the more you kind of research, try things out, see the failures, the adoption failures and everything, and talk to other people in the industry, you're like, well, the wave's not that big really. Or maybe it's just really far away and it's not right next to your nose. So it would be really interesting to kind of see how far that wave is and how large it is. Yep. To kind of how much time do you have to prepare? And a part of with the conversation we've had before, you told me that you've analyzed around 500 work positions, right? in terms of like how much automation is really happening within them? The answer you found is quite shocking. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, and my data set is about a year and a half old. But I was looking at position a year and a half ago, and it just because if you listen or look at LinkedIn, everybody's talking about automation, procurement, and everybody apparently has already implemented it. And then you actually look at the job descriptions themselves in terms of what are people that are hiring for sort of leadership roles in procurement are looking for, and the number is, as per, let's say, my very sort of skewed set, is under 4%. So everybody else, the other 96%, they still talk about, hey, the tooling you'll be using is, Microsoft tooling and Slack, or Microsoft Teams and Microsoft tools and that kind of stuff, and SAP Ariba, which is not, at least in my experience, not super automated. And so everybody's still looking to spreadsheets, email, and Slack messages, and then says work in a fully automated way, and that doesn't work. Those tools don't work. They're all kind of very separate from each other. And so there's only a small subset of where people are looking, or companies are looking, to truly have leaders automate in a way that actually works. And that I find that interesting. So you have LinkedIn as an echo chamber of where sort of thought leaders are talking to themselves, and then you have the reality of companies just not hiring or knowing what kind of skill set to ask for and how automation actually works. And I think that's a little bit of a chicken and egg problem there, where you're looking for leaders. Let's say I have 15 years of experience, right? And I've worked, and for over 10 years of that, I worked in emails and spreadsheets. And now I need to figure out how automation actually works. So it's a really challenging sort of pivot that leaders have to make in order to sort of educate and actually drive that sort of thinking. And I think this is where reality meets the dream state of future automation.
And if we talk about, companies actually like making a big step into adopting AI, the first step usually comes to like understanding your data, understanding your processes. Like, what is it that a lot of companies get wrong when they're faced with that task from either shareholders or C-level executives to, guys, you have to implement AI and just go and do this. Give us back the results. We expect a lot from you.
Well, if you start with just implement AI and you don't have a orchestrated process, you're starting at the wrong end. So when I think about kind of automation, process automation, it's actually data flow automation. What I mean by that is you have to think about all the data elements that go into, let's say, for procurement requests, like the spend data, the vendor record, and certain approvals and so forth, right? And so you want to think about, how does that, if I only want to enter it once, how does that carry all the way through to the end? And that's not AI. That is kind of workflow process automation. And the technology that I think is commonly used in procurement to solve that is the kind of procurement orchestration, intake-to-procure sort of software. And that works really well, and it helps you articulate how data flows through. And the other piece is, because you only want to enter it once, and the other piece that I think where this technology, the software shines, is that these modern platforms that kind of play in that space, you also implement it as a no-code type of implementation. Meaning, as a procurement leader, you don't have to go to IT in order to fix a small step or build the process at all. You can do it yourself, right? There's no-code set of configuration settings that you build out, and that becomes your process. And so the point is, I think that's where you want to start. You don't necessarily, at least I haven't written a procurement policy at the last couple of companies I've worked at. What I've done instead is I've implemented orchestration software, and the sort of the conditional logic and the approval steps, as well as how the data carries through, all that sort of config stuff, that's the procurement policy. Right. So the system becomes the policy, and it spins up different approval steps depending on what kind of approvals you need. And so in terms of the way automation works, is think of it as data flow all the way through. That is not super difficult, but it's certainly like different because you have to be very mindful in terms of who approves what, how do you carry that data piece through, who modifies it, who validates it, right? If you only want to enter it once. And then you can think about kind of like, where can I now drop AI in order to relieve some part of that administrative burden of triple checking certain things in order then to like start with the automation.
And how much do you feel like implementing AI solutions within the procurement workflows is a good fit for what the AI technology actually brings?
So we're very, very early days. There are some really useful places to leverage AI, analyzing legal documents, right? Because I'm not an attorney, right? But it's useful to have let's say a custom GPT or some sort of step where I can give it the kind of like, here's my sort of playbook, if that makes sense, right? In terms of what I find acceptable, and here's what procurement reviews, right? And then everything else, legal reviews. But at least I want to make sure that that the AI kind of assists me in that. That's super useful. Also, kind of pulling together multiple sort of PDF files and enter data points to make sure that the data pieces agree. The technology is very good with that. Just general kind of research on companies. The technology is very good, obviously, right? You can go out to the internet and pull together various resources. Also very good. We're using it for our InfoSec review. So we upload SOC 2 and then have a sort of a built-in, our InfoSec team has a built-in sort of like list of kind of review pieces, the NIST kind of compliance that they're looking for. And it looks, on the internet in terms of breach or other sort of notifications that have happened. So there's some spots where the technology is very, very good, and where an AI agent actually is really, really helpful and does speed things up. But it's not, certainly, at least in most cases, not end-to-end, although we are building a fully end-to-end sort of an AI-enabled sub-process. But it's not, no procurement person is replaced. And I don't really think that many procurement people will be replaced, but the skill set certainly has to change.
And just kind of to make sure that we don't go too fast for some of the listeners, let's maybe take a step back and think about how would you advise for people to actually start visualizing what AI is? Because right now there are just so many ways to think about AI, right? And when you say AI agent, what I understand is a lot of people, they don't know how to envision that within their processes. Some people might think, oh, do you just have ChatGPT help you with the things, and maybe that's already an AI agent, or maybe you find like, oh, RAG, and you can actually have a database and everything. How would you kind of explain to other procurement managers around there in the world who haven't made that kind of step into researching what AI is? How would you help them differentiate between what AI is currently and where it can be applied and what it definitely is not?
Yeah. And so the underlying assumption of sort of my answer is going to be that you have an orchestration software implemented, right? So procurement orchestration software where the steps are kind of outlined and you know what certain approvals mean. In that, we have dropped in some AI agents, custom-built AI agents, in order to do the kind of like automate certain steps or have the AI automate certain steps, right? So think of it as we had a step in one of our processes where a person needed to look at what the vendor had entered into the kind of their legal name, address, and so forth. Then they also provide us with a certificate of insurance, and they provided us with their W-9, sort of the kind of their registration papers. And we needed to make sure that all the kind of legal name information kind of aligns, right? So instead of somebody now doing this multiple times a day for looking at the various PDF files and what was entered, right? We built an AI agent to do that. And that's tedious and nobody wants to do that. And so it's faster that way. We also have for our InfoSec team, as I mentioned earlier, there's an AI agent that we had kind of our provider build where when the SOC 2 type 2 report is uploaded, then the agent runs automatically. It looks for external information, and then the input gets stored as an output automatically based on our sort of risk profile as a company, right? Mm-hmm. And think of that as a sort of like a custom-built GPT with a little bit more, with a few more bells and whistles. So it's a RAG database, meaning it only looks when it evaluates kind of security information internally, and then it does do some very specific web searches externally, and then brings that all together, and then kind of butts all that information up against our risk profile. And so that's really useful, because if I think about where the pain points are, InfoSec review and legal review, they have a tendency to take a bit longer, and it's a sort of a bit of a black box, right? But here we've built a functionality that should kind of speed that process up. We're early days, but I would assume that we should be able to cut out first it taking 8 to 10 days, that we are looking at 3 to 4 days, if that makes sense.
And let's say we've identified all of our processes. We found orchestration softwares, and we kind of like wrote down all of the process. We've identified where things can be automated, where they have folders to access to kind of get the data, analyze it by your instruction and guidelines, and pass it on to the next stage. What I guess a lot of people would say is like, oh, wait, but we have a lot of proprietary data. This is like secret stuff, the confidential data that we don't want to pass to an LLM. Mm-hmm. How would you advise people to kind of think about like, what kind of models do I use? Do I use like a local LLM that's going to be installed on-prem somewhere, like something open source? Or do I actually go and trust with something like Anthropic's models or OpenAI models?
Yeah.
How do you think around that area?
Well, my perspective is that procurement data isn't super confidential data. It's not health data of people. It's not PI. It's not really PII, right? It's confidential, but it's not like at the level of somebody's health record. But obviously, if you are concerned around like, hey, there's some secret sauce here, and we definitely don't want to get that out, you can do a local instance of an LLM, right? So you can basically, most likely, it would be a open source model on your own sort of hardware. With one of the LLM providers that we use, we have a zero data retention type of setup, meaning the company doesn't retain any data. And obviously, we also have in our contracts that they don't train on our data and that kind of stuff, right? So if you don't trust that, hey, you won't train on our data, but then you want to make sure that it doesn't sit in their instance, you can stand up a ZDR, zero data retention type of agreement, and make sure that is sort of appropriately kind of configured. That's a conversation with InfoSec and with engineering. There are ways to kind of build that, and I think that is a bit of an overblown data type of concern, if you want my honest opinion.
And what would you say are some of the main challenges? Because I believe there are a lot of people who have the same task as you out there in the world, thousands of companies, and everybody's trying to make their processes more efficient. And those are teams from anywhere from 1 to maybe like 20 people who have to like orchestrate everything together to make all of this like AI implementation work. What do you see as like the main challenges that these companies, these teams face when having to integrate AI solutions?
Yeah, so if you are in a kind of orchestration type of setup and you have sort of articulated your process into certain approval steps, I think that's a really, really good step because you already are thinking in a more sort of production line type of environment, right? And what I mean by that is most procurement teams, because they work in spreadsheets and email, they work like Craftsmen. And what we're needing to do is you need to take that sort of Craftsman approach and take a look at how Henry Ford sort of automated the production line. And I think that our sort of white collar jobs, so to speak, we need to disentangle and really be very deliberate in terms of what does each step do and what's the condition, what does that drive, right? And that takes, I think it's sort of revolutionary when you first do it, and then it's very evolutionary as you continue to tweak the system. No code, you can do that. I do that multiple times a week. So it's sort of like really important to understand. And then the question around kind of automation, what has helped me is a sort of a slight reframe of the conversation. It's not about jobs, it's about tasks. And so when you think about tasks, like what's this task here? Like what's that, like think of it as a really small step. And then is this task, do I add value? Or is it just really just administrative, right? So if it's highly administrative And like, as I kind of mentioned earlier, it's like, hey, there's multiple PDF documents and I have to look in the system to just validate certain kind of that the information is correct. That feels like it's a really good task for AI. Right. And I think I trust my gut there. And then I think about like, hey, how many times do I do this task? So if I automate this task, is there value where I get paid? Right? Is it repeatable? So as I told you earlier about the W9 COI kind of entered information work, we do that, or the team or the person does that about 100 times a week. Mm-hmm. So if I can save 2 minutes of tedious work that's deeply not rewarding, I'm saving 3 to 4 hours possibly on somebody not having to do that. And by the way, most likely, if once all the kind of kinks are worked out, it's probably better. So I agree. This person's time, 3 to 4 hours, can be deployed in something more productive versus a tedium of cross-checking, different files. So that's how I'm thinking about getting tasks, repeatability, and then sort of kind of like what can I now do with that person's time, so to speak, if that makes sense. And there's plenty to do. So there's I believe that 80, possibly 9% of procurement work is highly administrative. So there's a rich area of thinking about the various tasks and kind of figuring out how can I automate some part of that with the help of AI.
And not long ago, I was visiting one of the legal companies' office in Spain. And what I was shocked about is the amount of actual paper everywhere. There's stacks of documents all over the place. And right now, I hear a lot of companies talk about like, okay, the next barrier to AI adoption is going to be the data. Do you kind of see that being like a large problem for organizations? And how could you advise companies to kind of look at the data and understand how good does it have to be for an AI system to come and help us automate?
Yes, there's a lot of data, right? Because you have 50-page contracts with certain contract language that sits someplace, right, in a shared file folder. And it's not necessarily clear that whatever you agree to in the terms and conditions, that you're actually monitoring, let's say, uptime or certain deliverables, SLAs, and so forth, right? That's not necessarily aligned or connected to the billing, right? What do you get invoiced at, kind of the rate that is in the contract versus the rate that's on the invoice. And so, again, as I mentioned before, the point of kind of the automation is like, when you think about process automation, it's about data flow automation, right? So data flow, like how do I make sure that I get this piece of data, digitize it, right? It's right now on a piece of paper or on a PDF file, right? Digitize it in a meaningful way, and then have it available at the right time when I make a decision, like approving an invoice and so forth. And that there has to be sort of a high circular, so to speak, environment where kind of the data pieces kind of live potentially in different systems through APIs and get enriched as it sort of kind of progresses down the kind of the approval flow or the review flow of the processes that the procurement sort of supports. Again, we're very early days. How to think about it. So intake-to-procure, which is the beginning of orchestration, is really meaningful just because you start digitizing the process, right? Somebody's request that usually comes through an email or a Slack message is now sort of digitized in terms of dates, dollar amounts, vendor records, and so forth, right? That's a really good starting point. Then adding a P2P module to that in terms of now you're issuing a PO for the approved spend, and the approved spend is already categorized in terms of which GL account and which entity it hits, right? Sort of fully approved. So when the invoice comes in, it can be matched up by, let's say, an AI looking at the invoice, looking at the PO, it's pre-approved. It goes through the payment process very easily. Then kind of connecting, like, if you have a CLM or you use like a contract lifecycle management, the CLM, usually they have AI functionality. So sort of having that information that's in the contract feed back into your orchestration system would be very useful, or is very useful, right? So that as you sort of think through the process, you start with the bare bones, right? Spend gets approved, right? And then you start stacking on top of that. And there's many pockets of value, what's in the contract, what gets approved by InfoSec in terms of kind of what flavor of integration are we okay with, and then how often do we review those type of integrations and so forth. These things stack on each other, on top of each other, and I have to re-emphasize, we're very, very early days on that, and I don't think anybody has figured this out in a way where you would say you have, like, of the 80% I mentioned earlier of administrative tasks that I'm currently doing, that they have automated more than half away. I don't think anybody's automated that more than 10 to 20% truly away of that stack. So there's still a lot of runway for improvement. But the point is, you gotta, again, try and fail in order to figure out where the ragged edge of AI is today and where it sort of benefits you and where you can find value. And that may be slightly different for different people and different processes, but I think the point is you have to spend a lot of time chasing the bright shiny things, and then to discover, like, here's actually real value. And then you just have to kind of like you try different tools out and you just try it. That didn't work. And then I come back sometimes like, oh, no, this works actually, and it's predictable. The point is, ultimately, it starts with kind of orchestration, and then you can drop in AI in a really meaningful way. And you got to just keep trying in terms of where the tooling is today and how it supports the process.
And we talk a lot about tools. I was thinking it might be good for the listeners to kind of see, okay, what are these tools? And what is good about them and what is bad about them? Because obviously there is no one perfect tool, for everyone. Every single one has its pros and its cons. Can you talk about some of them and outlining like what specifically are the strong points of each?
Yeah. So I want to start by saying that P2P, like procure-to-pay tools, are not procurement tools. It's a finance tool that's being used by procurement, because procurement usually reports up to the CFO, right? Finance organization. And it's useful for them because now they have spent approval, and as part of the P2P process, and Coupa, Ariba, and so forth are sort of tools there. But it's not a procurement tool. I just want to be very, very clear. Now, a lot of companies are integrated with P2P providers because they are useful for invoice reconciliation and so forth, but it's not at least not my vision of automation. Now, these companies will tell you that they have intake-to-procure sort of bolted on front of it. It's not best at, in the sense of, I don't think, at least from what I've seen and what I've heard, I don't think that these tools are no code. And
we're talking intake-to-procure, we're talking about the actual invoices coming through emails being, read through in OCR, or...
No, intake-to-procure is basically the request comes through that tool, meaning somebody says, hey, I want to buy this software, or I need to get the service stood up, right?
So the manual trigger.
Historically, it's been a manual trigger. Somebody sends an email, it's like, can you help me with this, right? Or I'm ready to sign this contract. How do I get it executed, right? And so intake-to-procure is that whole sort of process up front around finance approval, legal review, InfoSec review, what actually gets approved, right? And the intake-to-procure, it's sort of a new software. It's like a ticketing system for procurement, right? And Zip was one of the first companies, I think in 2020 they were founded, that sort of leaned in very heavily, and they created a sort of a really like custom-made for procurement type of intake-to-procure software. And the industry woke up to them being valued at, I think, like they became a unicorn within like a year and a half after founding. And all of a sudden, everybody's like, ooh, me too, right? Because they realized that, hey, there's something here, right? And then all of a sudden, like, there's a lot of other companies that kind of are in that intake-to-procure space that are pure plays, and they're very, very good. I've looked at Upstream, Focal Point, Pivot, Omnia, right? They all compete in sort of that pure play kind of intake-to-procure arena. And a lot of them are extending into the P2P arena, right? So because you want to do the intake, what gets approved, and also the invoice reconciliation as well, right? Then you have the Coupas and Aribas of the world, the P2P providers, right? Because they have thousands of companies fully integrated, and they're offering There's other companies out there like Oro Labs that sort of creates a bolt-on to those systems, right, in order to have a no-code experience, right? And I think that's a really valid type of positioning, and those systems are like awesome, right? And they do modernize and give the procurement leadership the tools that where they can actually own the configuration, and you don't need a ton of IT support in order to stand them up. Like actually, my last implementation with the orchestration tool, we had no IT support, but we did API integrations, right? Call that 4 integrations, took them, call it half an hour for each, right? Done. Integrate to the ERP, integrate to our DocuSign, and so on and so forth, right? And the rest of the time we spent on just configuring different workflows and approvals and logical conditions and so forth, basically expressing our procurement process. And so those tools, especially because it's no code, you become all of a sudden the systems admin. And because you have that ownership, you get better at configuring your systems, and you develop the language of what's an efficient step, additional steps, removing steps, changing conditions, and so forth. And these little tweaks, they're worth a penny, but you stack up enough pennies, and all of a sudden you have $1, right?
Yeah.
And those sort of improvements add up to a process that's truly customized and continues to evolve with your own evolution as a company in terms of how you want to what you need approved and who wants to see what and so forth. And that is extremely powerful. And that technology is very, very good. And then once you have that sort of done, then you drop in AI based on a task level. And all of a sudden you see some magic happen where it, you see a glimpse of the future of what it can be and will be.
And if we look at, the standard consulting models of change management, they always say, you come into a company, there are people who are champions of the transition and change, and there are people who are resistors to the change. And usually you have like 30% of resistors, 20% champions, and the rest are 50% just, waiting and going with the flow. And if we're talking about automating processes within departments, I can imagine there is a guy called Billy whose main job is to, read the document, compare it, put a stamp, and take a paper from Sarah's desk to Mark's desk and just put it there. And now he knows, oh, Billy, we need you to kind of map out your process, start automating it. And Billy's sitting there thinking, wait a minute, if this is automated, what the hell do I do? What do you think is that? Because there is this huge kind of, I wouldn't say rebellion, but it creates a lack of motivation from like everybody within departments to commit to, this switch to a more efficient kind of workflow automation. How do you suggest companies go about this and actually trying to help maybe reason with people, explain to them that it's not that kind of black and white?
Yeah. Well, change is always difficult. 100%, right? There's no two ways about it. I think there's a lot of tedium in our day jobs. And if I can reduce some of the tedium, meaning like, hey, you need to download this contract from email, save it over here on the shared drive, then upload it over here, right? That's tedious and not really interesting. I don't think anybody really enjoys doing that type of work, right? You much rather want to use your brain saying, hey, instead of doing all these tedious jobs, maybe I can kind of stack some time together, kind of eliminate some and actually now spend more time on analyzing data, making decisions, driving sort of analysis. And I think everybody would tell you like, yeah, I think that is better. And somebody that says no, then maybe they shouldn't be on your team. I think where the change difficulty comes in is like, how do you envision, like if you're a craftsman, meaning, you're working your work as a black box, stuff comes in and stuff goes out, right? But nobody can articulate what happens in the middle. I think that's difficult to envision. What will that actually look like, right? And for me, I went from managing 28 people at one company to managing in my next job, 1. In order to have the time to spend on figuring out how does this automation thing actually works, right? And that's where I implemented orchestration software for the first time. And actually we started off by using a ticketing system and kind of bastardizing that for the procurement process, which essentially, these orchestration systems are. And then when I then saw, we implemented Zip, right, full disclosure back then. When I then saw Zip, I was like, oh, yeah, clearly that's better. It's instead of me trying to draw like Picasso, there's Picasso painting a picture, so to speak, right? And it sort of resonated very quickly. But I took the time to try to build an automation myself in order to teach myself how to work differently. And I read sort of books on kind of how IT operates or engineering operates, like Scrum is one of the books that I read. I read A World Without Email by Cal Newport, and a handful of other books around sort of different processes that are kind of how to think differently in order just to understand, like, how do I actually articulate kind of the Henry Ford way of working in a kind of white collar job. And then we build it. And so I gained firsthand knowledge, and I work very, very differently today than I did, call it 5-6 years ago, very differently, but I had to teach myself. Yeah. And now that I've done it, implemented multiple times, and I've kind of been in that sort of workflow orchestration type of supported system, right? It's easier for me to articulate, like, here's how your job will change, right? But it will always impact the AP team. It will impact the legal team. It will impact the InfoSec team. But having rolled out orchestration systems to thousands of people at this point, I've never once had somebody refuse to use the system because it was full stop. Mm-hmm. I think that the change to like a orchestration system is so intuitive to people, and they realize, like, hey, it's actually less time spent searching through emails, Slack messages, and so forth, because the internal conversation all happens in one place, that people embrace it very quickly. But you want to be very mindful in terms of how you, with your stakeholders like InfoSec, legal, and finance, right? That you very much be very clear around, this is your process, this is your proof process. Let me build it in a way that works for you. You ask them what they need in terms of, hey, who needs to look at this, and what do you mean by this step and by this approval and so forth, right? So that way you can then build it accordingly. And it's like, is this the expression of what you want me to build, right? And they see it, they try it a couple of times, and it's kind of like a baby walking for the first time. They sits down and then comes back up. It's like, try again. And then all of a sudden, before you know it, they're walking with this with this system. And yeah, I mean, here, just to illustrate the point, I just looked at this yesterday. We have, since we implemented our current system at the end of June, we've had over 42,000 approval, 3,500 requests closed, call it mid-9-figure spend approved. We rolled out PO issuances, and we've had about 145 people in the system approving stuff.
Yeah.
So it's a big impact, right? So that's all I'm saying. We're not a huge company, right? We're not Walmart or so, right? But it's big impact to, over 100 people. And all I did is, I had sort of learning sessions when we rolled it out. And then I created 7 to 8 mini videos, 2 to 3 minutes each, around, here's what the system is. Here's what this approval means. Here's how you read your request. Here's how you can speed things along. So kind of little mini how-to videos. We posted that on the Canvas in Slack, in our kind of procurement channel. That was it. And then obviously if somebody has a question or like, hey, how do I get started kind of stuff, right? We obviously support them really quickly, but it's usually just a quick Slack message saying, hey, click this button and then follow the instructions. That's all there is. So I don't think that this change is as scary as I think it could be. But you got to get started. And that first step is always the hardest.
And what I feel maybe is also on the personal level too. Whenever you do a process manually, you're in full control, right? You know exactly what came in, you've touched it, you saw it, you've made a decision, you hold the accountability to kind of pass it on. When a lot of it is kind of routed through a system, and especially if you have Slack workflows working there, you have Zap workflows working there, Z workflows working here, Salesforce flow working there, and you ended up having so many like workflows happening all across like 5-6 systems. Mm-hmm. How do you keep the overall control like visualization of what is going on with each of the instances. What are these instances? Which ones do we have to look at closer? Do we have a solution out there that kind of helps us solve the kind of orchestration visibility and maybe
Yeah.
remediation?
Yeah, there is. And I think what you're basically alluding to is like there's information in different places. How do you pull it all together, right? That certainly is a bit of a challenge, right? But the like orchestration solution, all the kind of orchestration solution providers, what they do is they integrate your Slack channel or Teams channel, right, with that solution. And then the key point is that ideally you through APIs can connect with the relevant systems like your ERP system or your DocuSign system, right? So that the information lives in both places and is accessible in both places if you must look in different systems or you just want to be in one system, right? And so, and then from a communication perspective, we did a fair amount of kind of teaching people to, hey, you want to use the comment section in the system, you'll get an alert in Slack, right? And you can click on it and you can, but you want you to stay in the system. That way it makes it very easy or makes it very clear in terms of, hey, here's a conversation with legal, right? Here's what was decided and here's how that then impacts the kind of the contracting. How many strands of information you can tie together, you want to do that. But even if you can't do that, you're still better off with a kind of procurement orchestration system, even if you weren't to integrate it with your ERP, which it's a bit of it's not great, but you would be better off just because, again, you have all your, you know what you're approving, you have all that in one place. But there is an opportunity for somebody to create a dashboard that sort of with AI enabled, right? That looks at your email, looks at various Slack channels that are not related to a request, your orchestration system, maybe other systems, right? And it's sort of where you teach it through kind of prioritization and sort of markdown tools and markdown files and certain harnesses in order to come to you, like where you can just hit refresh and it tells you like here of the 15 things that are that you're handling today, right? Here are the 3 most important. I've pre-drafted that email for you. Take a look. Do you want me to send it, right? So that doesn't exist today yet, but I believe that is something that we will be building here this year.
If we remove people from the loop, right? The automated process is only as good as, you know, how many like stops there are where somebody has to come in, have a look at, and the process that runs automatically will be much faster, right?
Yeah.
But that also raises the questions like, who do we hold accountable? Let's say that a PO number kind of went through, but in reality, it shouldn't have. Like, who are we going to hold accountable? The zip developer, somebody who's built the workflow, or a person who was supposed to do a manual check at some point. How do we solve that problem?
Yeah, I mean, there's different flavors of AI integration, right? So there's human in the loop, there's human on the loop, and there's full autonomy, right? Just kind of simplistically. Ultimately, a human will be responsible, has to be, right? And this is why there's a place for humans to do work, right? Because you have to be in sort of, there's certain points where you have to be in the system in order to review and then make decisions and approve certain recommendations, if that makes sense. How that exactly looks in a fully, let's say, different parts of the process, I don't know. I know that we are building, I think it has to do with risk profile, right? So how risky is it if this goes wrong? Right? You want to start with low risk type of profile. And so we're in the process of building a fully autonomous workflow with the help of our kind of provider in order to collect certificates of insurance, COIs. I've been in procurement for 15 years, as I mentioned, and I've yet to be at a company where a COI collection was done consistently and for all the partners where we need to kind of collect COIs. The issue is that certificate of insurance expires after 1 year, right? And so you need to collect a new one, right? And especially if you're, let's say, named insured or so, right? You got to make sure that coverage is still there. And it gets done in a very ad hoc way. You may have some people at some companies collecting kind of the COIs for your high risk vendors, but not everybody that you, let's say, started off with a COI when you onboarded them. And so we're building a fully autonomous AI process where the initiation of like, hey, this is due to be collected to COI, to reaching out to the vendor, to when through email, and then kind of the steps in terms of how to upload the COI documents, then compares the two documents, old COI, new COI. AI can take a look at like dates are different, that's expected. Coverage the same, that's expected, right? And closes out and then schedules for next year, right? I would deem that to be, if I go from zero collection to, let's say, call it 100% collection, and it's fully AI automated, actually I'm better off, even if the AI were to make problems, issues in terms of like, hey, this is not correct. I can still audit, right? But that's a place where I want to learn in terms of how good the systems are, right, in order to automate. And then once you do that, then it's sort of like, oh, now that I've done that, I now can think about other parts of the process, right? And we didn't just land here because we came up with this idea, but we actually tested some of the functionality that we are intending to use for the COI build in a couple of other workflows. And we figured out like, oh, it is able to do that consistently. The AI is, right? A couple of AI agents we had custom built. And like now if I take that functionality, get creative about it, and now I can actually spin up this whole fully autonomous workflow. So we're excited about it. Again, it's one of those things that I don't think anybody knows what the future holds and what it's going to be automatable, right? Or how we will automate some parts of the process. But I feel like this is a process we have to support, and we currently don't, not fully, not consistently. So we're better off doing it. And I certainly wouldn't want to be the one or the 3, 4, or 5 people that we would have to collect thousands of COIs and chase companies down for that. So again, I think it's a very positive implication of how the technology can help us.
And let's look at like professionals like yourself who are deep into analyzing, building, the architects of this kind of new world of autonomous, like partially autonomous, maybe kind of departments, machines. If we look at the whole industry, I'm guessing if somebody has fully automated one of the processes, it doesn't require all of your time to be focused on that specific kind of department. Because if everything's running, you kind of make sure that there are no holes in the hull of the ship, there's no leakages, everything's working correctly. And the kind of like the future of these kind of people who are architects in a particular department field, would their future look maybe fractional, where they can maybe take 5, 10 corporations and kind of help like change the industry and control, becoming like a command center for the procurement divisions in a particular vertical, let's say?
Yeah.
Would that be something that could be on the horizon for people who actually go very actively into this direction?
So if I were to say, hey, no jobs will be lost in procurement, I'd be with AI or due to AI, that'd be silly, right?
Yeah.
I think certain tedious aspects of jobs will just collapse ultimately, right? Then they'll be, and I don't think anybody will miss it per se. The skill set obviously will change of the people. So now I'm looking not for somebody that is very good at diligent, executing diligent work that is tedious really well, right? So now I'm looking for people that are actually more decision makers, that are comfortable with kind of querying AI and interpreting outputs and so forth, right? So there's going to be, I think, large procurement teams will get smaller due to full automation and kind of AI enablement. But it also will create more jobs, because currently I believe, based on, this is my own kind of sort of perspective, I believe a company has to be about 100 to 150 million in revenue before they even hire a procurement person, a single one. I believe that sort of dollar amount will drop pretty significantly, where smaller companies will be able to hire either kind of create a drop-in certain AI, certain orchestration software, right, that connects to their ERP, that's sort of pre-configured. And then you have a fractional CFO, a CPO, Chief Procurement Officer, that sort of helps you in certain aspects of the negotiation, but everything else in terms of PO issuance, approval, certain approvals sort of happens in a much more automated way, right? I believe that is going to be the future of kind of the evolution of and when you think about pyramid, there's so many companies that are small that don't have procurement, right?
Yeah.
I think there's going to be a blossoming of openings in that sort of kind of single person lone wolf type of procurement support environment. And that if you then kind of continue that thought process, then you would also say there should be fractional CPOs, or chief procurement officers, that support with very high degree of automation, much more than, let's say, larger companies may be comfortable with for smaller companies. And the outcomes are going to be better because you have clarity around what gets approved. You have clarity. You have a sort of cross-functional approval and then you have the sort of AI-assisted legal review instead of the CFO just looking at contracts and saying this looks good enough. So I do think that there's going to be a shift in terms of the capabilities of the procurement professional, but also a much broader aspect in terms of how many companies will be looking for procurement professionals to support them.
And if we look at, we have obviously the professional tools that people should be looking into. But in order for them to kind of get comfortable with, the vision of all of these professional tools within their working environment, I personally believe that people have to first get, accustomed to kind of using AI on a personal level. And what would you say are the current tools that actually help you become more effective, kind of structure your thoughts, maybe easier, and kind of think through different things? What kind of tools do you use to accelerate yourself?
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing what's out there. I mean, so I use all the sort of AI tools out. No, that sounds silly, but sort of the kind of the ChatGPTs, Claude, Grok, Gemini, right? I have a subscription to all of them, and I try them all out. And I oftentimes run the same thing with them in order just to see how different are they, right? Because there's a little bit different tools serve different purposes, right? So I mean, there's a lot of hype around Claude Code, and it's truly amazing, right?
Yeah.
And there is especially once you have figured out the power of Markdown files, and you build your sort of your own subset of your folder structure, and you have your AI integrated with that, and then the AI saves sort of its progress updates there, and it learns from what it did before. Very powerful and fun. I mean, really fun, right? I am dabbling a little bit with the whole sort of OpenClaw kind of setup. I am not enough of a technologist in order to really kind of safely build that, right? But in the meantime, OpenAI with, I think, ChatGPT 5.5, which just came out yesterday or so, they have a lot more agentic functionality, and they hired the guy that did OpenClaw, created OpenClaw, right? So everybody is sort of on that bandwagon in the AI space of hey, in creating agents. And then how do you make sure that the agents have the right context window? Kind of how directive are you in terms of what you want? How specific are you, right? How do you break jobs or tasks down, right? And there's a plethora of really interesting research papers that I stumble upon on Substack and X that I kind of use NotebookLM for in order to just kind of break down for dummies like me.
Yeah.
In order just to sort of take that technical talk and kind of translate it in terms of where's the technology actually going. And that is a fast emerging field. And I just use sort of personal task in order just to kind of learn a little bit more about kind of more agentic AI sort of capabilities. Early days, but again, I want to learn about it and kind of be able to articulate in terms of how it works for me. And ideally kind of keep stacking the pennies to a full dollar and more.
And for the listeners, it's important to know not to install OpenClaw onto your workstation, like your working computer. It's probably not the best thing currently. Maybe in the future, it's going to get more secure. And let's say for somebody who's listening, right, and they're in procurement, operations, or legal, and they've listened to this conversation, and they're like, okay, yes, we saw the tsunami coming. We want to keep our place in the industry, in this kind of vertical. What is the one thing for those who haven't yet started moving these directions? What's the first thing to do on Monday?
Start doing something. I challenge myself to try something new with AI every day. Tinsy tiny. Just try it and see where it leads. It's kind of like Hansel and Gretel, kind of following the breadcrumbs into the forest to the to the house of the witch or whatever. Nobody knows the endpoint, and we'll probably never know the endpoint, right? So it's a journey, and then follow the breadcrumbs on that journey. And I don't think you lose anything. And I think you gain a lot by just playing around with the technology and figure out like, oh, it can do this. What's the RAG database? What's Notebook LM do for me, right? And then all of a sudden, Notebook LM, I've used it as a learning tool just as an aside for probably a year and a half. And I'm going to use Notebook LM as the training tool for my team as I onboard new people, right? Because I can sort of build what I want to communicate. And then there's different flavors like videos, podcasts,
the
quizzes,
podcast one,
flashcards, and so forth that you can use in order to sort of supercharge your own learning. And instead of me giving you a stack of documents, I give you the choice of how you learn yourself and, by yourself. And then ultimately, I think maybe the big insight is I believe the usage of AI requires more initiative. Don't wait for somebody to tell you how to use AI. Kind of ask that question yourself, and you'll be surprised of what comes back and how many more questions there are.
Awesome. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming to the show, and I think it's going to be so beneficial for people to to feel inspired by seeing somebody take so much action, to kind of know of what is possible. That you just have to start and start playing with it. Be curious about all of AI kind of news, and not to be scared of them, because it's coming, it's real, and it's okay to start slow and get to the point. Because as you've mentioned a lot of times, the adoption, we're still very early in that process. And even though everyone I talk to feels like, oh, I feel like I'm behind, everybody's behind, nobody's behind. We're all in the same kind of like getting to the start point of the race. And I think it's up to us to do our best to make sure we're prepared for when the race starts.
100%. In the spirit of my early example about automation, 100% of people are talking about it. 4% of the companies are actually doing something about it. So start playing and start learning, and you'll be surprised at like the ownership you can take, and then ride the wave, because the wave is coming.
Perfect. Well, thanks so much. It was a great pleasure, Sören.
My pleasure, Shamil. I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you.
Awesome.